And we're back for our second segment in regards to the funding of the school budget override. My guest here to my right is Lisa Howard, who is our school superintendent of Winthrop Public Schools.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Lisa, for joining us. And as you know, we have Eric Gaynor here, our colleague, my colleague on this production. So Lisa, let's talk about what's going on with the schools.
Yeah, so we are very excited to be able to have the opportunity to put the override question back on the ballot. As you all know, in November 5th, we had an override vote. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, it did not pass. After lots of looking at the scenarios of why it may not have passed, looking at our communication, activity that we did working with an amazing override committee of people made up of families and community members. We felt really strongly that we could improve our practice based on what we learned, and we feel strongly that we really do need to have a school-based override for the sole purpose of, at a bare minimum, being level service funded for next year.
It's a little different, though.
It's a little different. The questions are structured a little different. The first question was a one question on the ballot. It was difficult for us because it was during an election, a presidential election in November. We were very limited in what we could put on that ballot, and we were not allowed by state rules to put an explanation of what would happen if you voted yes and what would happen if you voted no, and that was unfortunate. It was a lengthy ballot. We happened to be the last question on the ballot, which was exhausting for most by the time you got to the end. And then confusing because you had 4 questions from the state that had some pretty detailed information about the vote itself and what you were voting on. And then there was the community question for the school's override, in which we were unable to, by state law, to put an explanation. So it was very confusing for people. So, and we learned a lot from that. So now we decided to, we certainly wanted to honor, there were 3,500 people who voted yes in November. And then obviously there were at least 3,501 who voted no. So we really thought deeply about how having another override question would affect the people who voted yes and then the people who voted no. So we wanted to value those people who voted yes the first time around for $4.9 million. And we also wanted to value the people who said no at this point in time. We can't afford that. So what we did was broke the question out into 2 separate questions. So the first question asks if you would be willing to vote yes for a $3.5 million school-based override that would be specific for the FY26 school year. And that would allow us to have a level service budget, which is level service is everything we currently have, class size, the number of teachers, what we offer to students, what our fees are for the most part, and to be able to open school next year and operate basically in the same fashion we are this year. We then asked another question, which was, you'll see on the ballot, and it's for $1,450,000 to create for the first time, I think, in Winthrop's history. You can correct me if I'm wrong.
It would be the first.
Something called the School Stabilization Fund. Schools don't have the same, they do have the same ability, but it's often not the same opportunity to develop a stabilization fund in which money is deposited into that fund, and it is used for extraordinary reasons. So if the school district has the need, I'll give you an example, a new student may move into the community from a collaborative school, which is a small special education, public special education school. And if they're living in Revere and they move to Winthrop, and that tuition to go to that school for the sole purpose of meeting the needs of that particular student is $75,000, that tuition follows that student the day the student comes to town. Those are things we can't anticipate. And not being able to anticipate those, you still have to pay the bill when they come in. So other things that a stabilization fund can help, is the rising costs, obviously, of health care. The first time we had that rising cost, it was a shock to us. It rose 9.5% in 1 year, which is a very large number. So things like that, transportation, sometimes you may go over in your transportation costs. When we don't have a lot of transportation for the schools, but we do transport for athletics and for special education. The nice thing about having a stabilization fund is that the money is there, and the school district would have to ask the town council. Once that money
Right.
is in there, the town council needs to approve any sort of withdrawal from that account. But the good part of it is when you're withdrawing it from an account that exists, the school district's not impacting other town departments
Right.
when we have an emergency
Right.
need.
And your checks and balances is the fact that, yes, it may go into the school account, but you have to go through the town council
Absolutely.
to get the approval of what you need. And I think that
Correct.
that's important too.
And you don't have to withdraw it all. I think of it almost as what's the account you take out when you want to do your home? You want to do home improvements.
Right.
Your line of credit.
Yeah, and it's sort of a line of credit, but for very specific purposes. So
Right.
if you take it out for your home and you want to buy a car, well, that's probably not the right way to use it. But so for the schools, if you're taking it out, it's for an emergency purpose, and it's very transparent because you do have to have a public meeting, and you do have to have a majority vote of the town council to transfer that money to the school department's budget.
But what I think what's important for the public to understand is that these are two entirely different questions
Correct.
that are being asked of the voters.
And I don't know if people do understand
Right.
that, John.
So first of all, let's just, if you watched in the first segment, we talked about a debt exclusion. And a debt exclusion is something that has a timeline on it. As our Winthrop High School has a timeline. Our Winthrop High School is actually 10 years into that 30-year, and it'll be over in 31. In 2041. That will be. And Miller Field was
Yes.
a debt exclusion,
Right.
and that'll be over in 31.
Correct.
So those come off the tax base because those are this. What we're talking about here now is the override on our tax levy. And so what happened in 1981, we're into a lot of these ones here, but in 1981 there was a vote that was by the state that allowed cities and towns would not exceed 2.5 per year of their tax levy. At the time, every city and town was allowed to say what their tax levy was.
Right. That's
Some towns put it here, some towns put it here.
Right.
We were one of those towns that put it down here, and there were many towns just as similar to Winthrop. But what happens if an override passes is that override now increases that tax levy, and in this particular case, this would increase that tax levy by $3.5 million.
Correct.
That would increase that, and that would go into effect for next year's school budget.
July 1.
Right.
Correct.
Because I know you heard in the last segment that there were certain things that might not go into effect until 28 with the debt exclusion. But this is important because when we talk about 2.5, and I know a lot of folks get concerned over that because we're raising our taxes on that tax levy, but what we have to understand is why do they need $3.5 million? Why is $3.5 million the need for, how did we get here and why do we need to move forward on that and those expenses? And I know you can explain those, so I'd like you to just explain
Sure.
from the perspective of Winthrop of, 3.5 million is a level service that
Right.
brings us to
Yeah.
keep what we have.
To keep what we have, yeah.
And so,
it's a very good question because people ask that very question. We have a great frequently asked question document that's going out. It should be on our website by Monday. It'll be on the town's website. And within that document is a PowerPoint presentation that I put together from the perspective of a homeowner, which I am in Winthrop, and a parent, which I am, and for people like my dad. Who's not a parent of students currently in school. He is a homeowner, and he kind
and
of
a
wants to know.
grandparent of students that will be coming
Yeah,
through the school
a
system.
great grandparent of students. So,
There you go.
so how did we get here is a super important question. The cost of providing educational services and support services to kids and students has outplaced our revenue growth. So if the revenue growth that's coming in is 2.5% each year, there aren't a lot of things, especially in the last 5 years, that have risen 2.5% only.
I know, and I think we
It's
all
a
know
low
that
threshold.
too.
Yeah,
Right.
it's a
And
low
if we know
threshold.
that on our own, you're absolutely right.
Right.
Yeah,
So,
things are going up much higher
yeah.
than that. Just
Insurance
utility.
rates.
Right. So if I just take a quick snapshot of the last 5 years, so this is my 8th year as superintendent, following a great act on my way in. However, there's this long-standing history, and I'll just speak to 5 years, of asking for a level service budget, so educating our kids each year at a bare minimum the way we did the year before. So I always put out for a needs-based budget, meaning we want our kids to have more. We want them to be in line with other communities. But then there's this reality that because of the, 2.5 levy, that we're not bringing in a ton of income. So we also present a level service. So this is what we would need bare minimum, but this is what we would need for our students to be on par with other communities. We have a long-standing history of only being able to achieve a below level service budget. So over the past 5 years, we have asked for level service budget purposes for $4.5 million over those 5 years, and in terms of what we've had to cut back. So put it that way. So each year that we've asked for level service, we've received below level service in our request. So if we're asking for 34 million, we get 32. That means you have to cut. So we've cut $4.5 million worth of services and support systems and staffing to our students over the past 5 years. So that's created a structural deficit. Now, unfortunately, with a perfect storm of COVID, during those 5 years, so if I had a quick look back, 5 years ago, we probably should have gone for an override. However, 5 years ago, or 4.5 years ago, we were in unprecedented times.
Right.
So we were hit with COVID, folks weren't working,
Right.
many people had, really difficult times economically. The state and federal government, however, was providing schools across the entire state of Massachusetts with lots of federal and state money that needed to be used within the time frame of the year that they gave it to you. So in discussing going for a 2.5 override during COVID, it would have been disingenuous, to say the least,
Sure.
to ask people to increase their taxes there at that time. However, if you think about it, the cost of goods and services continued to go up during those 5 years as well. So now you see the structural deficit getting larger and larger and larger. So you couple the under-level service budget over the past 5 years with a significant increase of costs of just everything from
Right.
food to transportation to heat to electricity.
I mean, your largest increases in some areas were up to 14%.
Yeah, they were, and to sort of keep up with that pace. So that's part of the reason we got here. Another part of the of the reason that we're in the position we're in is we have actually strategically used every penny that we have, whether it's in an outside revenue source like integrated preschool tuitions, money comes in. We use that to offset the cost of the teachers' salaries. The grants that we receive, especially ESSER grants. So I would say we were one of very few districts who did not expend ESSER grants solely on staff. We had 5 staff total in using that grant money. So when that grant, we knew it was one-time funding. So when one-time funding goes away, if you use it for things that are going to last beyond 1 year, you have created an additional structural deficit. We actually used it for major upgrades in our school. Technology, infrastructure, heating, electricity, things that needed to be fixed, windows that needed to be fixed, materials and supplies, all things that we felt would last 1 to 5 years, and things that we were going to need to be funded anyway. So I think strategically using that money has allowed us to sort of stretch it out, but it's also, when we talk about these outside revenue accounts that we have, just coming to this particular school year, we were funded $1.4 million below a level service to open the school year. The way we opened the school year was we cut 2 teachers, a first grade teacher and a second grade teacher. That increased class size in grade 1 and 2. We froze the budget last year in January, which meant we stopped spending anything that wasn't critical, and we saved that money to be able to pay for some of the things that we needed this school year
Right.
out of last year's budget. So I believe we've exhausted, and I'm pretty confident that I know where all of the money that the school has access to is. And I've talked about this multiple times at school committee meetings. Because we never had a stabilization account, things like the preschool revenue account, circuit breaker, incoming money, those were our stabilization accounts for years. This particular school year, we've had to use the money in those accounts and draw them down to almost nothing. So we don't have the ability to do that for next year.
There's nothing else to.
So the creation of the stabilization account is an appropriate point in time to do that, because there are no additional outside revenue sources that are going to be at a capacity that I could say would be helpful to us if we have any type of, an emergency.
It does sound, Lisa, like this is a last resort, that you've gone down every avenue, looked at, like, turned over every rock, and it's there's nothing left. I mean, right?
There really isn't, and folks have to understand, and I laugh about this because I remember when I was in elementary school, the number of kids that were in my class, and there were 25 kids in a class, 26 kids in a class. Kids were different, and you wouldn't otherwise know that unless either you have a bunch of them yourself at home, or if you're in the public school.
Right.
Right now in our classrooms at, I'll speak to elementary and the whole district, the profile of a classroom is very different. Mm-hmm. So you have students who are regular ed students who need minimal, assistance on the daily basis. You have students who have very specific special needs in a general classroom. So if you're thinking about the 23 kids currently in a third grade classroom, you have students with special needs, you have students who have 504 plans who need accommodations, whether it's for physical, disabilities or other. We have a much larger population of English language learners, many who do not speak any English at all, and this is their first time in the country. Coming first time in the country, we're also seeing such a significant increase in traumatized children. Yes. So you're a third grade teacher, you have students, general ed students, this is public school,
right.
General ed students, students with 504 plans, students who don't speak English, and 23 of those pumpkins in one classroom and one teacher is actually similar to being an Olympic athlete as a teacher. Yeah. To be able to differentiate the instruction, to be able to meet the needs, the social, the emotional needs of these students. So it's a very, very different look when you're in a classroom. And sometimes people say, well, you go from 23 to 28. That's only 5 kids. That's 5 kids who have lots of stuff that they need. So it's just a very different world.
I don't think you can really compare.
But what happens though, is that when you talk about level service, what folks forget, it's not just about the classroom size in that. There are other services now that are going to be eliminated that other kids need.
Correct.
And because we don't have, that a level service is what's going to help students continue to move in the direction that they need to move into.
Yeah.
When we don't have that level service, that means we have cuts. When we start taking away, that is going to impact the child.
And if you
it's
look
not
at our
about
test
impacting
scores,
teachers.
right.
It's not about impacting other folks.
Right.
Or it's impacting our kids.
Right. And what's interesting is, and I'm very proud of the way we utilized all the additional funding we had from the state and federal government. We have MCAS, of course, is now not a requirement per se for graduation right now. However, the impact of the curriculum that we have put in place over the past 5 years, obviously with a focus and a vision on increasing our students' capabilities so that they could compete with their peers. The effect that has had on our students is not just because we bought a piece of curriculum. It's because we've provided all the things that kids need in order to access that curriculum. Average class size, and we have a pretty good class size right now, elementary, 22, 23. That's a really good class size. I'd love it to be 15. So you have that. The professional development that we're able to provide teachers when you give them a brand new airplane to drive. Illustrative Math has a program that we purchased and have trained our teachers very well to implement. You see it directly in the classroom, in the faces of the kids as they're doing their work, in their outcomes. We benchmark test kids a lot, multiple times a year. But that's the data that supports that the way we're doing things is actually working. If you look at our students that participate in co-curricular activities, we have over 600 student athletes and additional 350 students that participate in other co-curricular activities. It's because we're able to keep the cost at a reasonable amount for them to participate. You start cutting things and raising fees, you're now cutting kids out of opportunities.
Right.
And what happens then?
Exactly.
Where do the students end up? They end up in the center. They end up having nothing to do
See,
after
but
school.
I think what's important is people need to understand, and look, you afford it or you can't afford it. I get that. I realize that. But what they have to realize is that it affects people's lives. We're trying to provide students with what they have, but in what you just said, if a student can't play or can't participate in something because of a financial reason, we would always say, well, we'll figure out how to take care of that kid. We want to. But if we can't do that, then that child misses out. We didn't miss out when we were in school 30 years ago.
And this is not because we're not in the position we're in because we have done something wrong.
Correct.
We've actually haven't had an override in 15 years. I guess that's probably wasn't the smartest thing to do. People have them every, 5 to 7, 3 to 5. It depends upon what community you look at. We haven't spent money incorrectly. We've actually done very well. However, there comes a point in time where there's nothing left in the bank to be able to continue to do that. And once you get on a good track, so ideally if the override were to pass and the stabilization question were to pass, we would be in a position that we could now get back on track for not having to ever go out for a $3.5 million override again, as long as, and if you look across the state of Massachusetts, like I said, every 3 to 5, and in some cases 5 to 7 years, people go out for much smaller overrides once you become stable. Not having an override for 16 years, being impacted obviously, by COVID and what that has left us with. Our schools, people say you have brand new schools. Cummings School and the Gorman-Fort Banks are not brand new schools.
Right.
We have done a great job, especially with the extra money from the federal government and state government, upkeep of our schools, not ignoring things. And when you start ignoring those things because you don't want to cut, you end up having to cut your facilities lines because you have no place else to go. Now things start to really crumble. It's in the 8 years I've been here, I have not felt like I have been in a crisis, even during COVID, because we figured it out, even though we didn't have a manual to rewrite public education overnight.
Right.
I feel as though, as someone who does this budget work every single day, I feel as though we are in a crisis. To cut $3 million, and again, we don't know if we're going to get, people think, how do you know it's exactly 3.5 million? I don't. I have to do a snapshot of a moment in time. I'm worried about the federal grants we receive, about 1.4 million in federal grants that are 90% salary. Yeah. If the crazy world we live in decides to cut those federal grants to the state of Massachusetts, that's another 1.5 million that we'll have 4 million that we'll have to cut. But to cut, let's just give an average figure of 3 million. We're 85% salaries in our budget. If you look at our $42 million budget proposed for FY26, it's 85% salaries. The expenses are fixed. You can't cut heat, you gotta pay the bill. Can't cut electricity.
Right.
I don't wanna cut, cameras. The security cameras in our schools are, certainly, again, many upgraded during COVID with federal money. They keep us going. They keep us whole. They keep our behaviors in check in the school. They allow us to hold not only students but teachers accountable for entrance and exit, and they allow us to keep our facilities as safe as we can. And you're never 100% safe, but we are a heck of a lot further along than most districts. I do not want to see us start to let those things that are not affecting humans in the second. I don't want to see those things start to fail or have to be cut because they will affect us if there's an emergency.
Lisa, can we go back? Because I was struck by you saying it's been, was it 15 or 16
Yeah,
years?
2009 was
Yeah,
the last
yeah.
override.
Okay.
So-
And John, you know this too. Other communities go out, what did you say, every few?
It's about 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
So I don't understand why anybody would be critical of not going out for an override earlier. To me, this is a sound of prudent fiscal management that the school department was engaging in and being cognizant of the taxpayer. And for going that long, I think is quite, impressive.
It is. We don't expect trophies.
No.
You know,
But-
I think
but-
a big piece of it is people don't understand school budgets,
Right.
and how school budgets work. They are evolving. They are a moving target. I would say there's 4 things that we have zero control over: the cost of healthcare, and insurance, and all those sort of things that you have to have as an
Yeah.
employment agency. The cost of transportation. You can't, because it's not mandated in terms of how much they can go up or how much, the cost of special education services and out-of-district placements. We don't manage those. The Operational Service Division of the state of Massachusetts does. And, just the overall management of the school day with the unfunded mandates that the Department of Education continues to lob at us
Right.
without any, so you need to do this,
Yeah.
and you need to do it, or we're going to hold you accountable and take your federal grants away, but we're not giving you any money to do it. That's a whole nother animal that we,
Our students today are getting a much stronger education than we had when we were in school.
Absolutely.
But there are reasons for all of that and what we're doing. But there's also an additional cost to keep that going up. I mean, Massachusetts itself was ranked 1 in the country for their scores and their test. And when you take that 1 in the country, if you just took Massachusetts as its own separate country and you compared it to the world,
Where do
it's
we
right
rank?
up there in the top 5.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how
Massachusetts
strong
is?
Massachusetts is. It's very strong. So, we pride ourselves in
Yes.
our public education. We have a strong public education. However, we have to fund that. And if we don't fund it, what's going to happen is each year things are going to start to slowly disappear, and that becomes a problem. So
in the
which-
community too, because your
Right.
schools, primarily when people are looking, I'm the daughter of a realtor, so I do have a little bit of experience with this. When people are
That's-
looking to move to a community, the
That's
first
gotta
thing
be
they
the
ask is
most-
how good are your schools?
Most important thing.
And parents want to know that. And people want to know that because it is, just look at the statistics. The data supports that communities that have strong schools typically have a very low crime rate.
Yes.
They have, interagency and interdepartment workings, together.
And a sense of community. too,
Exactly.
right? It's
A sense of community, and my biggest fear is that if it doesn't pass and we do begin to have, we do have to cut that amount, it's going to be primarily staffing and increasing in raising fees. I don't want to be the school of mandatory services where the rest of the kids show up and we put them in a classroom and say, we'll get to you in a minute. Because that can happen very quickly in a school district. As we're not a big school district, we're not tiny, but we're not big. The recovery from that is my worry as the
Yeah.
superintendent of schools, because after all of that happens, we all still have to show up August 28th, and class size could be 30 plus kids in a classroom, and teachers are not going to be able to handle that because there's going to be so many needs in a classroom. And what is the fallout of that? And then it's too late.
Right.
It's too late because could you go out for an override in the middle of a school year? You could, but the recovery and the damage that's
No,
done.
and I think when you say, why haven't we had an override in 15 or 16 years? I think it's primarily, Winthrop is a community just like some of our other suburbs out here that, it was feared that they're never going to pass them. They're never going to pass. You got to come up with other creative ways. You got to strategically figure it out, and you've got to do all of that. Well, over the last 15 years, though, we've changed. Our community has changed. We've had a lot of people who've moved into Winthrop. We've had a lot of people who say, hey, I like this community here. It's a seaside community, a peninsula. You see Boston, you have the ocean. So people are moving in here and they're saying, well, I want my services though, too.
Yep.
I want great schools. I want these types of things. So now what's happening is people are realizing, well, okay, well, what do we have to do about that? And you have a group out there that's saying, hey,
They're amazing.
there's a group of people out there that are saying, no, our kids deserve this, we deserve this, we want our kids to have what other communities have. Right. And right now, the way the state funding all works, if you're in a city, you're getting a lot of funding coming through that Chapter 70 and all of those types of things, the way the formula works. But when you're in the suburban town, you're not getting that. And it's based on the town to come up with that. And so that's where the predicament lies. Yeah. It's not that we can't manage it correctly. It's that we don't have the funding,
we don't have that same funding
options that they have that are coming into it. I mean,
and we're surrounded by cities,
Right.
Chelsea,
Right.
Revere, East Boston. So when you're surrounded by these cities that are getting huge amounts of grant money, the only similarity between the money that they receive and the money that we receive actually is nothing. The similarity is the children, because we get kids from East Boston, from Revere, from Chelsea. We have very, very strict residency laws, residency regulations in our school to make sure that every child who is in a classroom in the Winthrop Public Schools is a resident of the town of Winthrop. And I'm very proud of that, and we spend an inordinate amount of time visiting homes and cross-checking that. However, when we start to cut a budget because we don't have enough money to pay the bills, there are certain things that are not mandatory that have to get cut. And we're talking measly stipends for people to do this residency check work. When those things start to fall, we start to lose control of our schools, which is, and the committee that has the override committee, the Yes for Winthrop's Kids Committee, so interesting because schools have such limitations. I, as the superintendent, have such limitations on what I can do in terms of I can promote the override, but there's very strict state laws on. So the community group that gets together, they are not a political group of people that knows how to run a political campaign. And this is a campaign. And it's a campaign that you really have to know what you're doing. And there's not a 2.5 override school that you can go to. And I applaud this group of parents that has come together and has worked so hard and didn't quit. So oftentimes when you fail, you don't quit. I happen to be super competitive, and I don't like to quit. And this group got on board and said, we're right with you, we're not going to quit. We did a SWOT analysis of the last override and what we did and how it worked. We weren't focused on failure. We were focused on how to get bigger, faster, and stronger, to get out there and teach people about the why. Why is it that we are in the position we're in? Again, not because we failed. It's actually because we did a really good job at not coming back to the community in 16 years.
Right. Well, I think just you being here right now, Lisa, I think helps, and providing hopefully some answers to questions that people have. And particularly a question I think people have asked is, how is this coming up in April, right? And I think you might have answered this, is you have a budget that you have to have in place for July 1st. So if I'm understanding this, I think you have to have this soon. I mean, how much longer
this
can
is
you
late.
Okay, that's what I was going to say,
April,
right.
That's why we did it in November to begin with. April is a little bit late. The town has, according to the charter, has dates that we have to present the budget. It's very difficult to be in a position where you don't know what you have for funding. So I've actually had to create 3 budgets.
Depending on the different outcomes?
Depending upon the outcome, because it's go time. And
That's
you have
true.
to submit it by a certain time in April, because then it has to be submitted to the town manager, and the town manager has to submit his budget to the town council within a certain
45
requirement,
days,
45
This
days
is about
of their vote,
late
and
as
they
you can
vote. They vote like first week of June.
Right.
Oh, so
Which
we
is-
can't really do it beyond this
No,
date, right?
and it's
No.
a problem for school departments specifically because contracts, of course, teachers have
Yes.
contracts and administrators have contracts. In their contracts, they have the right to be told that you're going to tell them that they don't have a job next year by a certain date.
Right.
Yes.
And so for professional status teachers, that date is in mid-May, and for non-professional status teachers, it's in June. As a superintendent and the manager of over 400 people, telling someone in June that you don't have a job in 30 days is a very, very difficult. I mean, recruiting and retaining teachers across the state of Massachusetts is a struggle. Winthrop has done a very good job of retaining teachers.
Oh, yes.
It's a really, really negative thing to wait till the last minute. it's also difficult for teachers to hang on who have families and need to pay their bills to say, well, if the override goes through, great, but if it doesn't, I can't hold on. So that was a
Right.
worry for me too, that we'd have a flight of teachers leaving.
Understood.
So on the ballot on April 5th, which just a reminder to
It's a
everybody, April
Saturday.
5th is a Saturday. I think that's important. It is open 7 o'clock in the morning until 8 p.m.
Yep.
So it runs the same amount of hours. It's April 5th, Saturday. There are 2 questions that are specific for the school. Question 2, and if it's okay, I'll read it through just so that, and we'll have this up on the board so people can take a look at it.
It'll be on the
But
website, yep.
shall the town of Winthrop be allowed to assess an additional $3.5 million in real estate and personal property taxes for the funding of fiscal 26, which begins in a fiscal 26, just so that everybody understands, we base on our personal basis, we go through a calendar year, which is, January to December. But in the fiscal world starts July 1st and it runs through June 30th. So it covers 2 years. But because we haven't hit fiscal 20, we haven't hit 26 yet, we end in that year. That's why it's fiscal 26. So currently we've been in fiscal 25 since last July. So the operational budget, $3.5 million for the fiscal year beginning of July 1st, 2025. A yes vote on question 2 would allow Winthrop Public Schools to stabilize the fiscal 26 operational school budget at level service. So that's important to know that. Maintaining school standards and preserving current staffing and class size, curriculum, technology, and general school expenses beginning July 1st, 2025, and for the fiscal year 26 school year. What's important on that is that wasn't allowed to be able to be placed on the ballot in last November
Yep.
because it was a state election. In this case, it was a federal election.
Yep.
So that's important. A no vote on question 2 would not allow for additional funding beyond the town's appropriation and not allow for a level service fiscal 26 operational school budget and would result in reductions of staff positions, reductions of programs and course offerings, and general school expenses, as well as increased class sizes and student user fees for athletics and co-curricular activities beginning July 1st, 2025. So it's right here on the ballot what it's telling you it's good for and what it would happen if it doesn't come through. So I want people to understand that. That's the question 2. And that increases the tax levy. It also keeps that budget moving forward at a level service. The next question, question 3, shall the town of Winthrop be allowed to assess $1,450,000 in real estate and personal property taxes for the funding of a school stabilization fund? Now, you're all well aware that the town of Winthrop has a stabilization fund, but that is the town of Winthrop. And sometimes there might be stuff that comes out that helps the schools, but we very rarely use that because technically, if you take a look at our town budget, what is the total town budget now? Is it about 70?
No, the schools is
Well, the
this
school
year
is,
roughly 36 in
Right.
terms of what the town contributes, but it's 41 in total. I want to say 60,
yeah,
around mid-60s.
I should know this, I'm on the finance committee, but it's in that area. And really what you should have in your stabilization account, what they really want is for you to have 20% of that in a stabilization account in case of any emergencies. And we're not there yet on that, but we are, we're working, and Winthrop has done a good job of trying to allocate where those fundings come on that. So but this would actually have a school stabilization fund. A yes vote on question 3 would result in funding $450,000 to a school stabilization fund, creating a fund that will support future school budgets. This is important. This is why I applaud the work that you're doing on this, Lisa, or Madam Superintendent, is because what you're doing is the first question, we're trying to get back to where we need to get to.
Right.
This question allows us to continue to grow to the point of, okay, maybe we don't have to go out for overrides in 3 years or so.
Correct.
We're allowing ourselves to grow by 1.4 each year. That's going to help us in those areas. So it creates the fund that will support future school budgets by enabling the school committee to seek approval of the town council. So now you're having both sides working together.
Transparency.
Okay, correct. To utilize the funds during a fiscal year for the general operating expenses of the school department. A stabilization fund allows the schools to maintain a steady level of funding, address the rising cost impacts of unfunded mandates, and supports the district's strategic planning and operational school district goals. Every school district should have this.
And I think it's important to note that this is something that was really well thought through because we were looking towards being transparent, fiscally responsible, but most importantly, not to be a burden on other town departments. Because when something happens and you need more money, if there's not a school stabilization account, which means the town can't access that for something, only the school can access it through a vote of the council, but we're not going back to the town council to ask them to take money out of the town's stabilization account or the town's general funds, which would impact police, fire, DPW, all of other town departments, which we work hand in hand with every day, and understand that they are also underserviced and underfunded. So taking more from them is not making our situation better.
So if you vote no, obviously they can't, the school
We don't
committee
have
doesn't
that.
have the right to go to the town council to say, they can go to town council and ask, but there's no stabilization
So they'd have to
fund.
come out of the town
It would have to
coffers,
come
which
out of
impacts
that,
other
which is
departments.
correct. And so if you vote yes on both question 2 and 3, because this is also on the ballot at the bottom, it tells you specifically that Winthrop Public Schools, you would allow Winthrop Public Schools to stabilize fiscal 26, which starts in July.
Yep.
But beginning, and would also add 1,450,000
Yeah, 1,450,000.
to a school stabilization fund for the purposes of ensuring financial stability and sustainability in school operational budgets beyond next year. So I think it's important. You know, some people have said, well, maybe I should just vote for that bottom one as opposed to the top one, but the bottom one's not going to help you for next year. It's going to give you something, but it's really, it's kind of...
And that can be confusing because I
Correct.
think people may think that the first question, if you can afford 3.5, I'm going to vote for this, but if I can't, I'm just going to do the lower number. They're two completely separate things.
That's
the
correct.
3.5 is needed to maintain level service for next year, or there will be cuts if that is not
Correct.
brought in. The 1.495 was to be fiscally responsible for future years and to make the minimal to no impact on the town side for all of the other services that everybody who has a child needs. The police, they need the fire, they need the DPW. We want our streets and roads to continue to be upkept. Any money that and there are mandatory things in the school department that the town would have to fund if in fact we didn't have enough money to fund it.
But when you think about it, right, you have
well,
a daughter that's in 6th grade. You've probably been establishing a college fund.
Yes.
Correct? But I'm saying, people look
You
at
gotta
those
plan.
types of, you're planning
Exactly.
ahead on these types of things.
know.
Well, the town, it's probably good for us as a town to start planning on having school appropriation funds.
It's
As
very
opposed to
forward
cutting.
thinking.
Right.
As opposed to constantly cutting and taking away from other departments that affect everybody.
Yes.
Right.
You know, they really do. So,
Right.
and school budgeting and the explanation of these questions, it's not for the average person. So I do this every day for a living. You do it every day for a living. We
Well,
can
not
talk
anymore,
about it.
but
Yeah.
yes.
Well, you're retired. I'll be there soon. So we get that. We have developed, myself along with the school committee and the Yes for Winthrop's Kids, we have created a frequently asked questions document. And that document was created with the mindset of a parent or somebody who doesn't have children, who does have specific questions about why, what's going on here? Why are we in this? In that document that will be posted up on Monday on the school's website and on the Yes for Winthrop Kids website and on the town website, there is a link to the PowerPoint, which is just sort of my brain coming out on a piece of paper.
But it's great.
That folks can just
So
kind of
there's
read
lots of
through. It's not a
resources for
ton.
people to kind
Yeah,
of look at.
And I have a telephone.
Great.
I actually work quite a few days a week, and I am happy to meet with anybody who wants to know more about how did we get here. I'm not necessarily up for a debate with people about yes
No.
or no, but I would be open to having any
But
conversation.
that's a great point. It's a great point. Madam Superintendent, because, look, I get it. There are people out there that they can't afford it, or there are people out
Yep.
there that, that may not change the mind of why they should have it or not. But you're giving them an opportunity to at least ask the questions.
It's an educated,
and so if you're,
educated vote.
even if you're not considering it, ask the question
Yeah,
so that you
so you
can
can be educated.
understand why this is necessary for our kids as we move forward.
And again, we need every yes person who voted, 3,500 people who voted yes in the last election to get out and vote again. We are working and we'll be working the polls. Like I said, we learned a lot with the last election. If you know people who are not registered, please get people to go on the town's website,
Right, and you
register.
bring up another point we talked about in the last segment too. If you are someone that is a Winthrop resident, but you are down in Florida or you're down somewhere else and you need an absentee ballot, there is a link online that I guess you can go online and link that request.
And
And
they'll
then you
send
can
you-
print that up and then you
Right.
send that request to the town hall so that they can send you a ballot.
Or if you have a wedding on Saturday, April 5th, or if your kid has
Right, you
13
can go
lacrosse
to-
games on April 5th.
You can go to town hall and,
walk in. You
walk
can
in
walk
for
in.
an absentee ballot.
And if you walk in and ask for an absentee ballot, I can assure you there will be a stack of pencils in the hallway
Right.
outside where you could probably bend over, fill it out, and turn right
But there
back
will be
around.
no ballots mailed to people like they've had in the past
No,
elections.
not
This
unless
is-
requested. But,
Right.
but again, if you go into Town Hall, and Town Hall is closed on Fridays, however, the Friday before the election, we are asking that the Town Hall be open,
Right.
so that folks can
But it
come
is
in and
open
at
on
least do
Tuesdays
that.
and Thursdays until
Evening.
7 o'clock.
7 o'clock.
So I think that that's important.
But
So,
John,
go ahead,
on,
Eric.
On that ballot, because first of all, I want to thank the viewers who are watching and tuned in because you're following along and getting the answers. But you might want to mention there's a question 1 on there as well for
Right.
those that might have tuned in a little
Right,
late.
right. So if you didn't tune in for the first segment, there's also a question 1, which is building a new firehouse location at 151 Pauline Street, which is the old middle school.
Right.
And I would advise you, check out that segment
Yeah,
because
beforehand.
it really goes into
Yes.
the necessity of why we need that. Look, and this is the other part too. We're not trying to pin people, together.
Absolutely not.
Town, we need a fire station. We need our schools.
Correct.
We want
We're
to
in it
have
together.
we are. And
We're
we
in it
need our
together.
town to have these. These are regular needs that we need for
And
us
watch
to do.
watch that video before this, because I think it's important for people to understand how and when you would be responsible to start paying for
Right.
the firehouse debt exclusion
Right.
and the schools. The
Which
schools is right away, and the
primarily
firehouse is not.
the firehouse debt exclusion wouldn't increase until 28.
Correct.
Whereas this one would increase in 26.
Correct.
But in 31, you have 140 on the average
Miller
taxpayer
Field.
coming off from
It's
Miller
Miller Field,
Field.
you won't be
And then
paying
you
for it.
have in 41, you would have the other with the high school,
Correct,
which is
will
about
come up.
480 on the
Right.
average person.
It's an
coming
investment
off.
in
So-
our future of, the future of our community.
So just a reminder, I don't know, Eric, if you have any final thoughts?
No, is there anything, Lisa, that you just want
Yeah.
a closing?
Yeah, just, like I said, we'll have things up on our website, on the town's website as well. Pick up the phone and call if you have questions. There's many people that can answer those questions. I encourage people to get that mail-in ballot, especially, a parent who's been to multiple, athletic activities on a Saturday
right.
or weddings. If you're not going to be here, phone friends that are out of state that and give them the information. And I'm, the school department and the fire department, we have been working closely together to really, really promote the investment in this town that we all love. Born and bred here. I'm not going to tell you how many years I've been here, but I have stake in this game. I still have a child in high school. I have 3.5 grandchildren that live in this community, are going to go to this school, and need the fire department.
Yes.
Chief Wiley actually was at my house when my youngest was a baby, and if it wasn't for him, we would have had a different situation. So we need each other. We can't function without the police, fire, and DPW, and they can't function without us because they love us. And I think I have 16 children of firefighters currently enrolled in the Winthrop Public Schools, with quite a few from what I visualize coming. So we're in this together, and it's an investment in our future. Winthrop is such an awesome place to be, not such a hidden thing anymore, but it's still a gem.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, Lisa, thank you for all of the work you do. And thank you again for just being here and laying all this out. I mean, because it's clear that you are invested, and it's clear that you have been working really hard and very tirelessly on behalf of the children, and not just the students, but for the whole community to give us a school system that we can be proud of. So thank you.
And we are very proud of our school system. We have amazing teachers and ESPs and everyone that works in our school department.
Indeed.
And our kids are pretty sweet too.
Yes.
Yes.
So I want to thank you, Lisa
Thank
and
you for having
Eric,
me.
for participating. I want to thank WCAT for allowing us the opportunity to put these two segments on.
Yeah.
I want to remind the public, once again, April 5th is the election day.
Saturday. Keep
A
saying
Saturday,
that. Saturday,
yes, it's a Saturday, April 5th. And these are really important questions that you really need to have. I would ask that you have good discussion and get the information that you need, not just from this. Follow through with what the superintendent, what the fire chief has said, you know, those websites that they have out there that we've talked about on this segment. Get the necessary information. Don't just listen to various things on social media or stuff. Find out the facts for yourself. Make those decisions that best advise you on the way to vote. It's obvious from my perspective, you know, where we feel, where we see where this should roll, but we understand that you need to take a look at all of that stuff. So don't lose the opportunity and not vote. Make sure that you go out there and vote, and make sure that you have the information. We appreciate and we thank you for listening. And I do want to thank the Winthrop Public Schools for the great work that they have done for our students. And so with that, thank you.